for that film, I wanted to ask about what you liked about your character in the film and how you became involved to the story of the movie and what that experience was like becoming attached to the story.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. Okay, so like at what point did you receive the script for the film and what really interested you in the character and of Scott that you play in the film and what was that experience like of becoming attached to the
It's a great question because the journey goes back a few years before we started production. Nathan Scoggins, brilliant writer, director, and friend, and I had been looking to work together for a while. We thought it was actually going to go before the pandemic. Obviously, the pandemic pushed things not just for us, but for everybody in the business. And the very first time I read the script was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I was extremely moved by the themes in the project because the sort of mid to high end independent film world has been my staple for a very long time. And that to me is where a lot of the diamonds in the rough in terms of scripts, themes, and especially characters are found. Um, I loved the exploration and kind of deconstruction of father and son relationships. I was very drawn to the themes of redemption, but also how real everything was, how real the characters felt. With Scott specifically, I liked that Scott, you know, in terms of, so I discussed the character with Nathan, and he was a little bit of a goofball and fish out of water because he was from a bigger city that had moved to this town where obviously the Maureen character played by the wonderful late Anne Hesh um, sort of wanted to prove himself. And with every scene, there was a chance to show a little bit of that arc. He did not repeat the same intentions and behaviors in every scene. And he's on the case. And at first, he feels like he's not trusted. And there was enough growth in there because it's not necessarily a huge role, but it was a role I felt I could sink my teeth into. And then once I heard Anne was playing the part, I was thrilled because of just her brilliant gifts as an artist, and then getting to know her really well as a person was icing on the cake.
film. And also getting speaking about getting to work with Anne on the film, and I had the chance to interview her a few times, and really liked the
Oh,
way.
okay.
Yeah, so I really liked the way that she like spoke about approaching her character. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about your experience getting to collaborate with her and really work together and building your characters.
Absolutely. I'm delighted that you got to speak with her twice because she's very special and very unique. There are very few people who are so incredibly interesting that no matter how long you've been in this business, are going to give you a take, a response, a behavior in a way that literally forces you to listen because you don't know what you're going to get next. Anne is one of those people. Her, and I talked about this when we had our premiere at the Globe, her work, there are very few artists that have that gift. John Hawkes, when I worked with him, he has it. Diane Venora, a mentor of mine, she has it. There's something that's they will bring something to a role that 97 out of 100 people won't bring. It was fascinating developing a chemistry with her because her energy was highly contradictory. She had this fun, playful 9 or 11-year-old girl energy that was ready to play, ready to take chances, ready to just have fun and get in the playground. But then there was this other side of her that was very serious about being in the zone because, and I know it's a little dramatic to put it this way, but she sounded as if she was fighting a lot of demons. That was first impression. Once I got to know her, because she really opened up, and over the course of working with her for I think it was 3 weeks, there was extensive conversation about our journeys, similarities in some ways, a lot of pain that she felt from childhood and also from the industry. And one has to be able to work with all different kinds of storytellers and artists. One needs to be sensitive to what they're bringing, open, and then you have your need to connect what's important to you and your character. So we felt kind of like the odd couple. We embraced it immediately. We were both very complimentary of each other's work, and a friendship developed, and it was very complimentary to how I had approached Scott, because there was a part of him that felt like he needed to please Maureen and prove himself to Maureen. But then as the story progresses, without giving away too much of the plot, at the end, he's not sure that he trusts her. He feels she knows something that maybe he doesn't.
And when you signed on to star in the film, was there any research that you did, or what was your preparation process like into playing like a law enforcement officer as well?
There's always research that goes into a part, and I have a process that I fall back on that has served me well for, gosh, uh, I'd say since 1990, and since 90 you work at it, you learn. But my approach to every character is, I will create a character Bible. That character Bible is relational to every other character in the script, even ones that aren't in my scenes, but that my character would be aware of, that are on the periphery, all the way to the closest characters that my character works with. What is my opinion of them? What is my backstory? What is my, more specifically, going into the scenes with Maureen, what is my intention going into that scene? What is driving me? What is my need from her? What is, the conflict in the scene, and how do I get what I need across? How do I get that from her? So, with Scott, and again, Nathan is such a talented writer director that's secure. We had that conversation early on, and we bounced some ideas off each other. We had a meal. We discussed it over lunch, and we had very solid parameters so that I was prepared as possible going into the shoot, and then as loose and open and organic as possible whilst I was on set, because there was, and again, that's his security. He trusts his artists. There was some improvisation that took place, and it was alive, and it made it organic and wonderful. Because with Anne, um, she's so great at what she does. It feels that every word coming out of her mouth is improvisational. You don't believe it's scripted. That's how great she is. So, yeah.
Mhm. And also, speaking about getting to work with Nathan as the writer and director of the film, I was about to also ask about your just overall experience on set with him and really developing the character together. What was that experience like to really flesh out the character in general?
Also, a great question. The um, symbiotic relationship between director and actor, director and cinematographer, director and costume designer. There's something very personal, yet very collective that happens. That's wonderful, and it's how I think you catch lightning in a bottle. Nathan is brilliant at putting people that know what they do in a position to succeed. There's complete trust. He empowers people that way. People feel free, even in terms of the crew, to be able to grow together, to be able to create something together. He treats everybody the same way. There isn't preference to somebody because they're a star or an actor. And that kind of trust makes it feel familial. It gives it a strength and a rootedness, if you will, in truth and comfortability. And that doesn't mean there aren't certain times where you give it as scripted and then ask for a free one where you can try something different. And if something different happens, he's not open to that. But what it does mean is that there's a clarity, and he knows the buck stops with him. He's very responsible, and conversations with him always provoke thought, and that to an actor is rewarding. He's an actor's director.
Mhm. And so with the film being set in Texas, and I saw that you also filmed the movie there as well, what was that experience like also being able to shoot on location throughout the production?
It was very, very interesting. In the last few years, I've worked in Texas a lot, probably over a half dozen projects, literally each one in a different city. So, Houston, Fort Worth, and you go through all of them. The interesting thing about Amarillo is that it seems to be stuck. When usually people use the term in the middle of nowhere, it's insulting. To me, it's a compliment because time stands still. Sunsets and sunrises actually mean something. And that to me is a character in the script. Everything breathes. It's obviously you've seen it. It's a slow burn. It's not a fast-paced film. It's the kind of films that I love to watch. I just saw another one like it called Stranger on Netflix. And Nathan's style reminds me a lot of what Jeff Nichols does. And most of Jeff's films are shot in small town Americana. Amarillo, Texas, um, is a fascinating place to film. There's a step back in timedness, if you will, that lends itself to very minimalist, natural type of filmmaking, the type of films that we see coming out of South America and Europe. And I was grateful to Sharpened Iron Studios, to Sean Doherty, of course, to Ralph Winter, who's what a brilliant producer that man is. He's obviously very gifted at what he does, and everybody will know him for his studio stuff, The Planet of the Apes and Fantastic Fours and gosh, X-Men and Wolverines, but he steps into independent film world, which is a risky thing for a highly acclaimed producer to do when he feels there's something of substance. And he's been a great mentor to Ralph. And originally, we actually were supposed to shoot in California. The second I found out where we were filming, I was thrilled because the location does the work for you. It puts you right where you are. So the film was financed by Texans. It was shot in Texas. The characters, except for mine, who's an out of towner that's from a bigger city, are in that place and colloquial to it. And there's a wonderful thing that happens when a location provides that. It starts to feel, I'm originally from South Africa. I'm an immigrant, and there's a certain nostalgia to it. So I was very grateful to film there. I will say I'm not overly crazy about humidity. It
Mhm.
reminds me of living in New York for 2 decades. New York was home longer than anywhere else. So I don't miss the humidity or the skaters, as they call them, the mosquitoes.
And also, besides this film, I also wanted to ask about, speak to you about another film that you were recently in as well, Angry Neighbor. And
Yeah,
also, I wanted to ask about how you became involved in that film and what you really interested you in your character in that film.
sure. Angry Neighbors had the most wonderful, quirky storyline and script. And part of it feels fantastical because the first time I read it, I wasn't sure if Frank's character, if everything was happening in his head or not. Um, come to discover all of
Mhm.
these characters and people that come into his life all represent certain things that trigger him. And then, of course, with it being based on a novel, um, there's a lovely, hardworking husband and wife team that's out of Minnesota called Hamid. His name is Hamid Torapour. His wife is Camille Torapour. Um, we also had been talking about working together. I read the script, and at that stage, there was a director in place. We had talked about, okay, he said, Stelio, I think this character probably fits you well. I read it. I loved it because I had grown up watching and reading. I read the cartoons for something called Little Richie. Now, I grew up in South Africa. We didn't get television until 78, right? And in Little Richie, there was this butler named Cadbury who was obsessed with pleasing. He was very prim and proper. He articulated everything well, but sometimes you got the sense he could be very easily flustered. I then watched the geniusly gifted Robert Guillaume in a series called Benson growing up. And I had those characters in the back of my mind when I read the script and kind of saw what Daniel Crento brought to the table. And I thought, okay, here's a little bit of an escape from the characters I usually do, a chance to have fun and fail really well with it. Um, and not worry. I don't need a tightrope or a safety net because he's written that way. So I really just leaned into the writing with it, and in fact, was absolutely delighted with the quality of cast that I got to work with. I mean, you're talking about some really great artists. So
And speaking about the rest of the cast and like Frank, like you mentioned, and what was your experience like getting to work with them and really building the characters and the comedy together as well?
it could not have been richer. Frank and I had kind of, and we talked about it, we kind of rubbed shoulders a few times in New York City because I had probably over 2 decades of theater, Lord contract plays, off-Broadway plays. Frank was 60 feet tall in that community and in that space, just a brilliantly gifted artist. Of course, his film roles like Frost Nixon, very well known. And to my absolute bewilderment, he knew who I was. I'm not sure who to blame for that. And I'm being sarcastic. I'm obviously very grateful, but I showed up 2 days early. The main purpose was to have a wardrobe fitting and adjust to the time zone difference. And I show up to set for my wardrobe fitting. I'm not shooting that day. They're all having lunch. And I sit behind the cabin because I didn't want to step into anyone's space. I'm sitting behind the cabin having lunch, and I feel this hand on my shoulder, and he says, "Stelio Savante, I'm so grateful that you're here. I'm a big fan of your work. Did you just start eating because I broke for lunch? Why don't you come into my trailer and let's discuss the scenes?" And to hear that he was a fan of my work, sometimes you're shocked when people know you and you realize, okay, there's a lot more people watching your work than you think, but also the grace with which he approached the entire situation. We had 2 or 3 days together between, getting to know each other, between everything prepping on set and then a little bit of time for dinner, lounges at the hotel, etc. Um, I found him delightful, incredibly intelligent, never afraid to take risks. And he was absolutely adamant that he'd be there for his coverage for my scenes on my coverage. It wasn't even his coverage on camera. So that's very generous. And he came up to me afterwards and was, again, just very, very embracing of the work and encouraging and continuing of in what I'm doing. So I could not have more positive things to say about him. I had 2 brief conversations with Bobby Cannavale, also terrific, and really just again delighted at that kind of a cast.
And also, speaking about working with the cast, was there any improv that you did for this film as well? Since it is a comedy, and maybe coming up with ideas in the moment, or did you mainly stick to the script for this one as well?
There were the scenes with the fire, which got kind of complicated, and it's tough to talk about because it'll give away too much of the plot line. Um, how do I? So in part of the and people can see a little bit of it from the trailer. There's a huge fire that happens in the film. Well, that night, um, torrential downpour, and they had certain equipment on set they were ready to use. There was so much madness and chaos that it actually lent itself to improvisation. So there was quite a bit that happened on set. My character, Daniel Crento, gets incredibly frustrated because Frank's character, Mr. March, Mr. March won't listen. He just won't listen. And I don't work for him. I work for Mr. Lapham. So when all this chaos ensues, there's a wonderful dynamic that happens that is improvisational. Again, it's tough to get into it too much because it'll give away part of the plot line.
And also, I wanted to ask about getting to work with the film's director, Warren, and I saw this was his first feature that he directed. And what was your experience like getting to collaborate together on set as well?
Very. open, very laid back, hardworking uh, young man, and very much a team player. You know, there were certain scenes we had where we had to film, I guess you could call it across from a creek from each other, where Frank and I were, and we had to hurry up and get it because we were losing light. The light wasn't matching. It was close to the end of the day, and he made it work. So yeah, you know, Lapham Rising was just overall a very positive experience. Grateful to him, grateful to the producers.
And now with both films playing in theaters, are you looking forward to hearing feedback from audiences who are seeing it? And what's that experience been like as well, getting to maybe connect with audiences who have seen it so far in theaters?
It has been incredibly rewarding because we have been flown to a lot of different locations to do Q&A for the film. When we did it, Sharp and Iron Studios put together a wonderful premiere at the Globe in Amarillo. We had over 900 people show. 900 people stood up and clapped. We had a standing ovation with applause at the end of the film. To know that your work, and your, by your, I don't mean me personally, I mean the film, the collectivity of our cast and crew has uh, entertained someone, gotten them to forget what they're dealing with every day, you know, facing adversity of bills and whatever else they're going through. It's been tremendous. The Q&As, we've had some very interesting questions. We came back, we did the same thing in Glendale. Nathan did a few of them. Um, it was wonderful. It's always interesting to see how different people respond to a film in different locations. And ever since I've started doing this, because I filmed overseas a lot, and obviously in many cities, I've been doing this a long time. One of my favorite things to do is go into a local cinema, no matter what's playing, and see how folks in that country, in that city, react to a screen. And it's fascinating because you go to a movie theater in Jordan, you're lucky to get through the screening because people are smoking and you can't quite. I'm allergic to cigarette smoke, but they're brilliantly keen filmmakers and artists. They understand cinema immensely well, which is not surprising. The Middle East, especially Iran, I mean, that's where some of our greatest directors have come from. You then go to the South in our country where a lot of people talk back to the screen and you miss things that happen when that's in there. You know, then you go back to New York and you come out of the movie theater and people have a very elitist perspective of, they're very critical. So it was tremendous taking what remains around the nation. I believe they both opened on the same day theatrically, and for the cities where it's playing that people are not, excuse me, for the cities where it's not playing, people are able to download the film. It's on demand, it's digital. But to have that theatrical experience in this day and age is a privilege simply because the franchises have really dominated theaters. I think we find ourselves at a time where some of my favorite movie theaters don't even exist anymore. In New York City, I lived on the Upper West and we'd go to Lincoln Plaza. They would show my favorite films in the world from my favorite filmmakers in the world, whatever country you want to name, they were showing that film there. Great independent film as well. Those theaters here and here in LA and in New York, they're closed, they're gone. So to be able to get a theatrical release with independent films that are thought provoking and kind of real art or art house as opposed to big franchises or you know, a lot of people call them theme park films, and I'm not criticizing them, but it's a privilege to be able to get theatrical. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that was mainly it, but thank you again for taking the time out today to speak with me. I appreciate it.
Karen, thank you. Thank you for taking
Yeah,
time. Happy holidays to you. If you
you too.
celebrate Christmas, Merry Christmas. And I appreciate it.
You too. Thank you again. I appreciate it as well.
You got it. Have a great weekend. Bye bye now.
You too.